Carlotta, Vashon, how are you? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
What's going on, dude? Great to see you. Really good. Please come on in. What's going on, Vashon? How are you, sir?
Not much.
Thank you for joining us at the Revolution Watch Bar. The first question I want to ask you about is the first day that you arrived in an Ivy League university. So tell me a little bit about that experience you had, like the first day when you arrived at school and you were like, wait a second.
Unlike most kids in the US who go on school visits, they visit 10 campuses, they choose. I'm in India, like Ivy League, great. Like my parents had always said I was going to an Ivy League school since I was 2 years old. And so I was like, great, I got in, I'm going to an Ivy League school. Well, if you get to an Ivy League school, you're the smartest kid in your class. You're a straight A student, you're class president, I was captain of the basketball team, I was school prefect, and then you show up and there's 2,000 other motherfuckers that are exactly the same as you and frankly way more impressive than you will ever be in your life. And I'm sitting there going, yo, these Asian kids are just like coding shit up. I'm like trying to understand what the professor's saying. I have no clue what's going on. And I realized so quickly, like within the first month there, I was like, yo, I'm not cut from the same cloth as these cats.
I suck.
And so I think you have a choice in that moment to make, which is one, you could be like, well, I can just bust my ass and work really, 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 really hard and try to get on the same level as these kids. Two, you kind of give up. And then in my case, I was like, well, listen, I don't think that this education and my GPA is going to define me. The thing that defines me my whole life has always been the game of basketball. It's the thing I love the most. It's the thing that's kept me on a straight path. And so, I had come to America thinking I was going to play college basketball. Didn't realize that at 5'10", 135 pounds soaking wet, you can't really play Division I basketball. But I said, hey, if there's one thing I'm going to work at for the next 4 years, I'm going to do this because even if I fail at this, I'm going to love what I did versus here, I'm miserable already and I'm just going to make myself more miserable. And then a bunch of stars aligned for me. And my senior year, I got a shot to walk onto the Penn basketball team. They put me on the JV squad. I played a full season at Penn. And that was my college story.
I love that you were like, hey, I'm going to play on this team by the end of my college career, and you did it. So you sacrificed your GPA. I like it because because I asked you, so when you were applying for jobs, did anyone ever question your GPA? And you said, you know what, at that point, I realized I had to be an entrepreneur.
When you start to apply for jobs, in some cases, you just submit a resume. They don't always have you don't have to put your GPA on there, but when you come out of Penn, if you don't put your GPA on there, everyone assumes there's a reason why you're not putting your GPA on there. I had always sort of been an entrepreneur, growing up. I would when my dad traveled for work to the US, he would bring back a bunch of American candy and toys, and then I would go and sell these to the kids in India for profit. And the cool part about that was my profit margin was infinite because my cost was zero. My dad was paying the costs and I was making all the profits, which was tons of fun. I was the first person in my class with a CD writer and a DVD writer. So I would burn, pirated copies of movies and MP3s, and if a guy wanted to give a girl a mixed disc, I was the guy who would make that and sell it to them. And so I've always been selling something. My whole life, I feel like I was always that kid. And so when I got to the point where I was like, all right, it's time to go into the real world, I didn't do all the things my classmates wanted. I also am not a 9-to-5 guy. I know that about myself. I think self-awareness in this life is half the battle in anything. I say this about basketball all the time. You will never see me try something on a basketball court that I haven't done 1,000 times before. And then there's cats who show up there that think that they think they're Kobe Bryant out there, and it's like, bro, you can't even dribble a basketball. What are you doing?
Playing the NBA. Dame el béisbol.
Self-awareness in life is so important. And I feel like I was very self-aware and saying, I can't be a 9-to-5 employee. I will get fired within a week.
You're fired.
And so I better work for myself because that's the only way I'm going to be able to survive. And so then it was, okay, well, what do I know well? Well, I know basketball really well. That's what I love. And I've always been a tech guy. I've always fiddled with gadgets. I've always been on top of the latest internet trends and software. And so I said, well, how can I blend my two loves of technology and basketball together? And I said, well, all these teams need to make better sense of data and understand who's playing well, who's not, what combination of five guys on the court do the best together. And so basically I started a data analytics company. It was originally just meant to be a project to help the Penn basketball team. But then I graduated and moved to New York, and I said, well, if Penn basketball needs this, there's 25,000 other high schools and colleges around the United States that need this too. And that's how my company Crossover was born. And I basically spent the next 8 years building that company and living the dream. I got to meet, everyone from Michael Jordan to LeBron James to every great college coach that there ever was. And so again, as a kid growing up in India, having watched all these guys on TV, to then fast forward 10 years later, being able to be in a room with these guys, not as a fan, but as someone who was providing value to them, I think that was the most rewarding thing for me, because I was able to give something back to the game.
And I want to talk to you about Michael Jordan because you have a very special watch that's related to him as well. But how did the watch bug bite you? I
was always obsessed with the digital watches growing up. So I loved the Casio calculator, the remote control TV watch that you could use. But I never had any money to buy any of those things growing up. And so I was all like, when I grow up, that Casio calculator watch, man, that one day I'm going to be able to buy that. I also think there's one professor that I had at Penn who was a f***ing like, this guy was the worst human being on earth. And I remember vividly, this guy gave me a D- my first semester with him. And so I was like, guy. And so we go on Christmas break, and he sends an email, I remember, to like the entire class with like a wrist shot of him like on the Mexican Riviera being like, hey guys, hope you're having a good winter break. Like, here's me. And I'm 99% sure it was a Glashütte Original, some model, which I wish I still had that email, because I would love today because I didn't know anything about watches at the time. Right. It just stuck in my mind that this dude was such an asshole, and he was showing off his fancy ass watch.
How dare you?
And so I feel like that irked me a little bit. I was like, one day I'm gonna have a nicer watch than this. Right. And so my first watch was a Zenith El Primero open work Chronomaster that I saw an ad for somewhere in some magazine, and I was just drawn to it. I don't know why. I honestly didn't know the difference between an automatic watch and a manual wind at that point. I knew that it was a good looking watch. And it was $7,000 something retail, and I was like, I can't afford $7,000. I was like, I gotta find this thing pre-owned for like $3,500. And so I'm on a trip to Italy at the time, and I mapped out every single watch store in Rome, and I'm like walking around with this girl that I was dating at the time, and after like the 7th store, she's like, there's a lot of watch stores in Rome, huh? And I'm like, yeah, I guess there are. No, and so finally she realized that like I was on a watch hunt as opposed to sightseeing, which didn't make her very happy. And as we're heading back, I was just like, hey, there's a jewelry store, it's really hot, let's just go in and cool off, get a water. So we go in, and there's like this old Italian woman behind the desk, and I go, hey, do you have any watches? And she goes, well, I don't really sell watches, but I've taken some stuff in on trade. Let me show you what I got. And after a whole day, and by the way, prior to going to Rome, I had searched New York for like 3 months for this watch pre-owned, couldn't find it anywhere. She opens up this roll, and in it is the exact watch that I wanted. Wow. Pre-owned, no box, no papers, but it was the watch. And like, I didn't even know how to tell if something's real. Someone had been like, hey, hold the watch up to your ear and see if you can hear the tick. And so I'm standing there like an idiot in this jewelry store holding, I'm like, I think it's real. And so I think she gave it to me for like $3,200. And I was the happiest man on the planet. I got my one watch, I wore it every day for a year, and I was like, I'm never gonna buy another watch again. I think I'm good, right? But then one thing led to another. I was in Istanbul on another vacation. There was a Lange store in the lobby of the hotel. I saw a Lange one every day for 7 days, and I was like, well, what is this thing? And I started Googling it, and that led me to Hodinkee, and it led me down the forums, and I just got sucked in so deep. And before you knew it, I was like 100 watches deep, right? I bought, my next watch was like a Frederic Constant world timer, because I always wanted a world timer, and it was $2,000. Yeah. And then we went from there to a JLC world timer. And then, of course, my big first purchase, I was like, that out of glaciute. So on a trip to India, I stopped in Frankfurt Airport, and I remember going in to the Wempe there, and I bought a Panomatic Lunar.
Nice.
And that was my first $10,000 purchase. I was like, let me run into that dude again one time in my life so I can show him my watch. And now here we are.
Amazing. And when did your love affair with independent watchmaking start?
I would say almost instantly. My day job is investing in startups. To me, independent watchmakers are the startups of the watch world. And so I'm drawn to them for that reason. They're the underdogs. They've got something to prove, but they're also nimble. Everyone asks the question, when you're a startup company, everyone says, well, what if Google does this? Well, yeah, but Google's not doing it for a reason, because they've got 10,000 other things to deal with. And it's the same thing when you look at independent watches. They are able to take risks that the Richemont brands and the Swatch groups and the LVMH guys can never do, because they've got shareholders and too much at stake. And so I think that lends to the coolest shit in the world being done by independent watchmakers. And so the same way I make my living investing in startups, I scratch my watch itch spending my money on independent watches.
You mentioned your fifth watch with a Journe, so let's segue from that into the Journe on your wrist. I take it that was not the fifth watch.
This was not the fifth watch, God, no. This is a watch that I wish I had bought when someone had offered to me for $75,000 right before the Journe hype train hit, thanks to Watchbox, and now here we are. I paid many, many multiples of that for this watch, and most people assume that my favorite watch is the Jordan. And sentimentally, story-wise, yes, the Jordan watch means the most, but gun to my head, you got to get rid of everything, and there's only one watch you can wear for the rest of your life. This is the one.
Really?
I love this watch. I love everything about this watch. I would say it is the perfect watch, and I recently got to put this on a bracelet, which I had never done before. It was always on all sorts of colorful straps, but I ironically put this on a Ming bracelet, which they just launched this week. I was in Kuala Lumpur. They gave me a bracelet, strap it on this thing. It is a perfect fit. And now I'm like, God damn, this watch on a bracelet is literally, to me, the perfect watch.
Phenomenal. I love it. Okay, so you mentioned the Jordan. You're wearing a Jordan hat.
I mean, it literally looks like Jordan has shit on me at all times. I have personally put Michael Jordan's kids through college with the amount of money I've spent on his brand at this point. So.
Excellent. Tell us a little bit about his watch.
This is a cool story because it starts on Instagram, and it starts with somebody who's become a good friend of mine now, but at the time I had no idea who he was. He was a random private account, and the guy sends me a DM one day, and he goes, it was a very grainy picture of an Urwerk, and he goes, do you know what this is? I look at it, I'm like, well, it looks like an Urwerk 220, but I'm like, it's not. The color scheme is nothing I've seen before. And like somewhere I could see like an etching into the bezel, right? And I go, I don't know what this is. What is it? And he goes, well, I just ran into a guy in a supermarket, and he said that Michael Jordan had a limited edition of 23 watches made by Urwerk. And this guy was a member of the club where Jordan golfs, and he got one. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you're putting the two things that I love in watches and Michael Jordan together, and like this, I have to own this watch. I need it! So I start making phone calls to everybody. I called the guy who represents Urwerk in the US. He's like, bro, I'm under 20 NDAs. Don't even ask me these questions. I can't even confirm or deny that this watch exists at this point.
Classified, eh?
I'm hitting up everyone I know. I'm like, can somebody call Michael Jordan? And they're like, you out of your mind? We're not calling Michael Jordan for you. So a year has gone by that I've been searching anywhere for this watch. Never have heard a peep, have never seen one in the flesh, haven't even seen a real picture of one anywhere. So they clearly like had done a great job of keeping the whole project under wraps. And so on off chance, I'm in Miami for Art Basel a couple years ago, and I have lunch with a big hedge fund guy who's an investor in my fund. And I'm wearing an Urwerk 220, the regular, the peasant version at this point. And he goes, what the hell are you wearing? Because he's a watch guy, but he's never seen something like that. He was wearing an RD2.
Right.
And so I start telling him about Urwerk and the watch, and I said, funny story, Michael Jordan had a version of this watch made for him and his buddies at the golf club, and there's 23 of them, and man, I've been searching for a year if anybody will sell one. And he goes, oh, you want me to call him for you? And I go, call who? You want me to call Michael Jordan? I'm like, get the out of here. Right? And his partner at the fund is sitting with, he's like, dude, don't call Michael Jordan. He's not giving this kid a watch, right? This guy's the nicest human being in the world, like legitimate, worth billions of dollars, does not give a He's like, let me text him. So he texts MJ. Lunch ends, I've forgotten about the whole thing because nothing was going to happen here. It was just a 5-minute conversation in passing. 2 days later, I'm in the shower in my hotel room in Miami, and I see it's the hedge fund guy calling. I jump out. I'm like, hey, what's going on? He goes, hey man, is this thing called the Grove 23 Urwerk for Jordan? I go, yeah. He goes, all right, I'm putting you on the phone with Michael's manager. Like, I've told him about you. They might do something for you.
Wow.
Oh, you gotta be shitting me. So I get on, I'm still not expecting anything. I'm like, this is such a long shot. There's no like, how am I gonna ever get this watch? Anyway, the guy's done some research on me. I talked to him, and basically my message was, listen, I love Michael Jordan more than my own mother. I will never sell this watch. They will bury me one day in this thing. If there's anything I can do, anyhow, what you name it, I will do it for this watch. And I can't say that about any other watch in the world, that I would have gone to that extreme to, literally be like, listen, do sexual fit. Like, you tell me what you need, and like, it will be done. And the guy was just like, hey, listen, like, we've got some coming and they're being allocated, but let me talk to Michael and see if we can work something out. 3 days later, watch arrived. It really goes to, like, if you really want something in this life and you put it out there, it'll happen.
That's incredible. So I'm not sure if you do this as much as you used to, but I kind of think of you as being one of the best meme artists out there. So tell me a little bit about how that came about, and tell me how you find the meme to be kind of like the cultural commentary of today, So I've always considered myself a comedian. I like to make people laugh. Like, that's always been my thing. I try my best in every conversation. Started off with a joke, it disarms people. People are like, all right, cool, like, this guy's chill, And so to me, memes are really like the internet version of that. It disarms people. They're like, if somebody just looked at my watches that I post, they'd be like, maybe this guy's a snob. Like, this dude's like some crazy rich dude that like takes watches way too seriously. And I think memes to me are my way of like reminding people that, like, hey, this is a fun hobby. It's brought a lot of us together. But like, don't take that shit so seriously. And I think the reason why mine have resonated in many ways is because I'm the one guy who's still putting his money where his mouth is. Like, I'm still buying the stuff that I love, and a lot of it is unique and fun and cool shit. But I have no problem bashing the same guys that just sold me that watch if they've up or if they've done some dumb shit. And like, if you're not going to hold people accountable when you're spending 200 grand with them, then what is the point of this hobby anyway, right? So I think memes have just been a fun way to engage with the community, to remind everyone that this is just a hobby at the end of the day. And I think the memes are really the reason my account took off. Like, I originally started NYC Watch Guy as a way to just post pictures of Red Bar meetups and all the stuff that I was attending in New York. And initially it was just a couple thousand people that were following me, and then I started to poke fun at the industry, and all of a sudden, things took off to another level. So Vasu, I find your memes to be hilarious, but I think what's unique about your account is that you're public about who you are. Like, most of the meme accounts are anonymous, right? So the question I would have for you is, have you ever been allocated a watch because of a meme or the desire to not be memed about?
Both. I can tell you that very large brands have been extremely upset because I guess they have people who are sensitive up top. I try not to get overly personal with the memes. Like, I've always kept it, like, even if they're super R-rated, it's never directed at anyone. It's the brand as a whole. And that's what, because I'm not an asshole. Like, I'm a nice guy. I want people to laugh. I don't want someone to feel hurt about this.
Yes.
But I will say that there's people who take that shit way too personally, and they think that if I'm making fun of the brand, then I'm making fun of them.
It's personal.
They've taken it to the point where they have blacklisted me from being able to buy anything from their brand because of my memes. And then they've tried to make peace with me by offering me something from their brand. And so, yeah, like, there have been benefits to it. My hope is that I am giving something back through Instagram that enhances the value for the brand, and therefore maybe I don't have to play the game.
It was really interesting when we all went to the Maldives. We of course all brought Max Booster watches, right?
Right.
Some of us even went swimming with Max Booster watches, which I had no idea that the perpetual calendars were that water resistant, but nonetheless.
Well, we found out.
Yeah, they were, incidentally. But I also was very interested in what everyone else brought as their second or third watch, which was not necessarily a Max Buser.
Right.
And you brought a very beautiful Vashon Constantin Overseas skeletonized perpetual calendar. So tell me a little bit about this, because this is one of my favorite watches.
For the longest time, Vashon being part of the Holy Trinity, for 10 years of my collecting journey, there was nothing that they had put out new that I was like, I really want to own that thing. And then, I'd say about 3 years ago, they really shook things up. I don't know if there was change up top in management from the Richemont side. I don't know what happened, but I will say that I noticed a drastic change in the way they were doing business. And then they started to release a few things that caught my eye. The first thing that really got me interested in Vacheron was the Corey Richards prototype piece. It was just something that drew me to that watch. I was unfortunately like the underbidder at the auction. And then when I visited Switzerland a year later, I managed to meet with some folks at headquarters, and I told them, hey, listen, like, that is the first watch you've put out in a while that, like, my heart is beating for that thing. And if you ever release it regular edition, please, I'm begging you, like, I want one. I would never have been allocated one based on my spend history, which was zero. Right? Because New York had 100 clients deep that had spent millions with them, and they could only get 10 of them. And to Geneva's credit, they shipped out an 11th piece for me, right? And to me, I was like, they get it. Like, again, like, I'm gonna provide them a ton of value just because I love this watch so much. I posted a million times, I've told the story a million times, and so that got me into the brand. And then I think a year later, they released the rose gold version of this, which I was like, that might be the sexiest open work perpetual ever created. But I don't wear colored metals, and so I didn't ask for one, even though I loved it. I was like, I'm not gonna wear it. And then when they released the white gold, day one, it came out, I hit my guys up, I was like, yo, that's the one, man, come on, please. And it took them 2 years, but 2 years later, they didn't make me play any games, and they delivered the watch late last year. I don't think they're looking at me as like, oh, he's an influencer, he should get a watch. I think it's more, he really loves this stuff. He's going to speak authentically about it. He's been very open in telling us, like, I didn't really give a shit about your brand for the last 10 years, but now you're putting out good shit, and I'm here for it, and I'll support you.
It was funny because I remember writing a story, I think it was like 2 years ago, where I had a similar revelation where I was like, dude, is it just me or is Vashon just freaking killing it, right? And then, like, release after release, my comps were good, and then they dropped the 222, and I was like, holy shit. Okay, so I'm gonna give you back that, and let's look at that, because I have no idea what you have.
There's a Shapiro in here, which is a fun one, not one you see very often. This is a piece unique that I got to design with him. And the cool part about this is I actually got to work on the watch with him.
No way.
Like, physically, like, in his workshop. I got to blue the meteorite to exactly the blue I wanted. I got to blue the crystallized titanium dial to the exact shade that I wanted. And the cool part, my parents were in town from India, so they got to come and for the first time actually witness, like, the watch craziness that they had heard so much about. My dad always looks at my watches in terms of how many cars he could buy, and by his cars I mean like $5,000 cars in India. So he'll be like, is this 15 like Marutis? And I'm like, a little bit more than that, Dad.
That's stunning. And how important was it for you that you could actually not only creatively participate in the creation of this watch, but actually physically get in there?
I never thought it would be possible. So, like, when we started this whole thing, I had reached out to Josh, and I was like, hey, listen, I've visited your workshop, which his workshop at the time was a garage with his pet turtle and his, and some other animals running around there. I mean, his story is incredible. To be a self-taught watchmaker, a principal of a high school in California, and then now to launch his own in-house movement, and he's able to charge $80,000. Like, God bless him. I'm so happy for him and for American watchmaking to having a little bit of a renaissance because of it.
Yeah.
I reached out to him and I said, hey, listen, I've got like 5 or 6 buddies I think will want to do a watch together. I want to do something different. And he said, well, what are you thinking? I said, well, your cases are a little large. I don't love the 40 or the 42. Can we go there? He's like, all right, well, listen, how about I make 39 millimeter titanium cases, which I'll never do for anyone else. And it was also the first time he made his own cases. Up until then, he had been buying the cases from someone. So he actually milled his own cases cases in-house, which we got to see. And then he said, look, everybody gets to choose whatever dial they wanted. And I basically was like, look, I want to do something that you've never done before. And so he came up with the idea of crystallized titanium, which we had never seen a dial entirely made out of crystallized titanium before. So he found it, and then he said, well, you can put this in solution and put electrodes in it, and you can crank up the voltage and you can change the color. So like,
Yes, science!
I literally got to like sit there with this dial dipped in acid, cranking a voltage meter and watching it go from like silver to yellow to orange to red to blue to purple and then back to silver. And we kept doing this process until we got to whatever exact color I wanted. And to have been able to be a part of that in some way, I think it just makes the watch more special. And I say that because I got this watch and I thought to myself right before I got it, I said, man, it's taken Josh like 8 months to deliver this down, or maybe even a year, way longer than he said it would. I was kind of annoyed about it. And I said, I've also bought so many high complication pieces since I placed that order. I'm like, will I ever even wear this watch? And I have found myself every single trip I take, this is the watch that I put on my wrist for the plane. And I think it's because I had something to do with making it that it draws me back to wearing it more often than not.
Fantastic. So Vasa, you've got a Ming here.
Yeah. I was just in Kuala Lumpur,
right,
and got to spend a ton of time with the guys from Ming.
Right.
And they actually, funny enough, like they asked me the question, what do you think of our brand, and like why aren't you a collector of like a lot of our stuff? If Ming had been around when I had first gotten into collecting, I think that I would have bought a bunch of their entry-level pieces because I think they're fantastic, and there's no one doing anything remotely similar at the price point that they're playing at. And so if a friend who knew nothing about watches came to me and said, hey, I'm looking to buy my first watch, what would you recommend? This would be one of the top 3 brands that I would send them to. And Ming is definitely like a crazy creative genius. Like that dude is, I was like, what kind of drugs is this man on? Because holy shit, he's got some incredible ideas. I can say that they've got some really cool shit coming. The reason I hadn't bought much from them was because the really cool high complication stuff has remained kind of very close knit within a small group of collectors.
Sure.
But I assume that where the brand is going is they want to do more of that, and we saw that with the World Timer that they came out with a few weeks ago. I mean, that's a stunning World Timer for 20 grand, and I think I'm expecting to see a lot more really cool first evers out of this brand, just knowing what I know about the creative process behind the scenes there.
You'd mentioned at the beginning of this interview that when you go on these overseas trips, sometimes like challenging things happen to you. So what's going on, dude?
Well, we've got a pet missing, unfortunately. He ran away from the folks that he was staying with, and pets are like children, so we're on the next flight out of here. So this was supposed to be a 5-day Singapore trip. Unfortunately, it turned out to be an 8-hour Singapore trip and back to New York to start the hunt for him, but I think we'll find him, and at least we got to hang out for an hour.
I can absolutely sympathize with that and relate to it. When I was in Tokyo for the Paddock exhibition, I got a phone call, and my Dachshund Bandit, who was having some issues with her hip, so she was prescribed a bunch of anti-inflammatories, which were supposed to last a month, and they were meat flavored, and she basically ate the entire bag of them.
Oh no!
In one shot, right? And so of course she was well taken care of and so on, but I just got to the next plane. There's only one thing you can do, right? And so I get it. At the time, it's a very hard thing to process, but I'm sure everything will be fine.
Fingers crossed.
Absolutely, but I really appreciate you taking the time.
Of course.
I think maybe the very, very last question I should ask you is, you described going to 7 watch shops in Rome with someone who you were at the time dating, who clearly was not a watch person, right? Does it make a difference to be dating a watch person?
Having things in common is always important, and so finding somebody that's into basketball is probably a lot harder than watch. I don't know. They might actually be equally hard to find. Having shared hobbies and being able to talk and have someone that's supportive about the things that you like, and vice versa, is always, I think, hopefully a a recipe for a long lasting relationship. So
I totally agree. You guys have met Bibi, and so I had
Yes.
the great experience of going with her because she was a Lululemon ambassador from Singapore to Bangkok because they're opening a store and she was teaching classes, and it was nice to be like her assistant, where like I was just basically meant to walk around and like help out, you know.
at a Lululemon exhibition.
At a Lululemon exhibition.
That sounds like a pretty good job. I don't think you were complaining.
It was fun. And then we, on the top of the classes that she taught, we went and did additional classes on top of it.
Oh boy.
And at the end of the trip, we basically both needed to be in traction because we were both like, dude, we just killed ourselves. And then we started laughing because we're like, yeah, but that's what we do. Right? So commonality is so important. Right?
Is that why you showed up with a broken foot to the Maldives?
No, that was because I attended my first Indian wedding.
Right. Well,
And bro, your people go hard.
that's why I have a very simple rule. I don't attend weddings.
I was like, I've never partied this hard in my life, and I'm 55 years old. I can't be doing that kind of shit, you know? So I fell off a stage, and that's how that happened, like in the middle of dancing. Sir, it was a pleasure.
Likewise.
And Carlotta, who's off camera, thank you for being here as well. Cheers.